Welcome to Knitting Step by Step, the video podcast that teaches you how to knit. I'm your host, Jason Blanc.
And I'm your knitting instructor, Ivy Reisner.
This is episode 4, Finishing. Yay! We're about to finish the scarf that you guys have been knitting through the last 3 episodes. If you remember, we started with materials, showing the basic knit stitch, and we've picked up stitch, added yarn, and now you should have a scarf length about 5 feet long or so, 60 inches. But we're going to learn about other stuff in a little later on. But first, before we do that, there's a little bit of house cleaning to do. Internet presence. We've got another one. It's at facebook.com. That's www.facebook.com. Search the groups. Find us, Knitting Step by Step. You can place a comment, talk about projects, talk about anything knitting at that spot.
And I have a link to that in the show notes to the group. Also, this week, I interviewed Jason on my writing podcast, The Writing Cast. The link to that will also be in the show notes. So, if you want to hear about Jason's interest in game shows or my interest in writing, head on over to www.thewritingcast.com and pick up episode 7. Also, if you have a knitting-related podcast and you'd like me to mention it on the show, try to get some more audience, let me know. If you have a promo, even better. Finally, I have a surprise, and I haven't told Jason about this yet. If you send me a picture of your finished scarf, I will put it up on the website if you give me permission, and also there will be a drawing. As of September 15th, I will do a drawing from all of the pictures I get, and you will get an official Knitting Step-by-Step tote bag. So send a picture to Ivy at knittingstepbystep.com, and in the subject line put scarf picture.
That's kind of cool. Contest. Maybe I'll do the drawing. Why not? So what we're going to do, as we said, you have a 5-foot length of scarf. What we're going to do is show you 2 ways to bind off your stitches, and we're going to show you how you weave in the ends. Okay, we're going to show you 2 methods of binding off. Now, this first method is more traditional, correct?
Yes.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, you just knit 1 stitch as normal, and then you knit a 2nd stitch as normal, and now you want to take your left-hand needle, put it into that first stitch that you knit, lift that stitch up over the 2nd stitch that you knit, over the tip of the needle, and drop it down into the work. Again, you knit a stitch, you take this for this back stitch, up, over the end of the needle, drop it into the work. One more time this way, you knit a stitch as normal, you lift over the stitch, over the tip of the needle, and drop it down into the work.
Now, you said you wanted to knit this as a loose form of knitting, or a loose form of bind-off. Why?
Yes, because the additional pressure of putting the stitch over the loop tends to tighten up the edge, and it doesn't give it much flexibility.
And what's the downside of this particular bind-off?
This is probably the tightest of all bind-offs. You wouldn't be able to use it for the top of, say, a toe-up sock, because it doesn't have any elasticity at all.
And that's where method number 2 comes in?
Yeah, method number 2 is a lot more elastic.
Where did you learn it from?
I learned it from Elizabeth Zimmerman's Knitting Glossary. And if you've never heard of Elizabeth Zimmerman, she's the one knitter you must know about. She's the mother of modern knitting. She is the EZ in such patterns as EZ Baby Surprise Jacket and EZ Pi R Squared Shawl. She has revolutionized American and European knitting.
And if you want to check her out, where can you get her?
Go to schoolhousepress.com. I'll have a link in the show notes. Also go to Amazon, Barnes & Noble. She's probably the best known knitter out there.
Okay, show her bind-off, or this particular one.
Okay. You normally knit 1 stitch, so you have 1 stitch on this needle. You move it back now, your other needle, and now you put your needle through this. You knit the 2nd stitch in, and just pull that loop and try to work as loosely as you can straight through that front loop there and off the needle. Again, I'm going to try to arrange it so you can see it as well as possible. You put this loop on this needle. You put the needle through. You're going to knit this stitch. I want to show you how we're going in the normal way. It's coming out the back in the normal way. Wrap it, and now you're going to go through the stitch as if just a regular knit, and you're going to continue straight through that first loop. You try to keep it loose, keep this loop here a little bit on the big side, pop both loops off. This loop goes on, and you're going to go in, as if to knit, around, through, come through this stitch, keep it loose, pop it off. Now, there are quite a number of ways to cast off. Elizabeth Zimmerman herself came up with the sewn bind off, which is quite possibly the loosest bind off out there. If you go to a book called The Knitting Companion, you'll see an almost encyclopedic list of bind offs. If you go to Elizabeth Zimmerman's Knitting Glossary, she teaches a bunch of them on that DVD. You'll want to build a repertoire of different bind offs for different purposes.
For example, what do you mean?
The sewn bind off is the perfect bind off if you want to use it for the top of a sock. If you want to do a shawl, you might want a very elastic and yet very beautiful bind off, so you might want something like an I-cord bind off.
Okay. So again, depending also on the yarn, depending on the project, will depend on the method of bind off you'll use.
Yes.
Okay.
And I'm going to finish to the end of this row only because you do something very special with the last stitch.
Okay, and you'll show us in a second.
Yep.
Would you say that finishing is sort of the hardest part of a project, or is it, what do you think?
I think the hardest part of a project is what the yarn harlot Stephanie Pearl McPhee calls the black hole. When you knit 500 rows and it doesn't grow, and you knit another 500 rows and it doesn't grow, and you pick it up the next morning and it's miraculously 5 inches longer. This is always especially good when it only needs to be 3 inches longer.
But, I mean, because for me, over these last 4 weeks, I've seen that each skill that we're learning here has its own difficulties of picking up, from adding a ball to finishing a project to learning the knit stitch, things like that.
Mm-hmm. And these skills build upon each other. So once you've got the basics of knit and purl, everything else is really just a variation on those. Once you have those 2 stitches, in reality, you can do anything you want with knitting.
Was your first project ever a scarf?
I've done a billion of these garter stitch scarves. In fact, when I can only purl, these are the only thing I could do.
Because it seems like every first knitter's project usually is a scarf.
Yeah, they're very simple. They're very beautiful, although I know of one person who started with socks. I find that really wonderful and impressive.
Because socks are more difficult?
There's a lot that goes on with socks. Socks are a little bit more difficult. Okay, when you only have 1 stitch left on the needle, you want to take your end, and you want to take approximately 6 inches or so, and snip it. Just cut it. Now, you can just pull this thing out and pull it tight if you want to. I prefer, just because it looks a little neater to me, to pull the tail through and pull this loop closed. That should bind off.
And, okay.